Welcome to the 10th episode of The Protective Factor, conversations that inspire hope and healing. My name is Emily Savino, the Assistant Director of New Jersey Statewide Student Support Services, serving Morris and Sussex counties. We are generously funded by the New Jersey Department of Children and Families. Be sure to like and follow us on social media at NJ4S Morris-Sussex. Find this conversation and the other episodes in the series wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for joining us. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Protective Factor. My name is Emily Savino. I'm the Assistant Director of NJ4S at Morris and Sussex counties. And with me, I have Dr. Liz Nissim, a clinical and school psychologist. Thanks so much for being with us today, Liz.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So we're here today to talk about an important topic, talking about navigating the special education system in public schools. And if you would like to share a little bit about your background and how that relates.
All right. I'm a clinical and school psychologist in private practice. My practice is psychological and educational consulting in Livingston. I have a team of therapists, and we cover the age range. Our specialty is the special needs child, adolescent, and the family. But we specialize in ADHD, autism, anxiety, behavioral disabilities, and learning disabilities.
Okay. Yeah. So lots of experience in this area. Yeah. To start off, we as we discussed prior to recording, this topic is important because it can be a complex system. And so we're going to talk about the basics today. So can you share a little bit about what are the different support plans available to youth in schools in the public school system?
In the public school system. So there's 3 tiers, and each one provides more complex support. And the first one is the INRS, or the Intervention and Referral Service Plan, the 504 Accommodation Plan, and the Individualized Education Plan, or the IEP, which is what a lot of parents know.
Yes.
The INRS plan is the first kind of line of defense that a parent can request when the teacher or the parent actually notices that a child is struggling, and it's a temporary, short-term plan that lasts anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. No diagnosis is needed, no testing is needed, and it provides accommodations for students in the classroom with the hopes that this is a short-term issue that will then be remediated and we can move on. The next level is a 504 accommodation plan, and for this plan, the student needs a diagnosis: anxiety, ADHD, some diagnosis that impairs the child's ability to function within the school system and access their education. And that provides strictly accommodations within the classroom and for standardized testing. The third level is the Individualized Education Plan, the IEP, where there needs to be testing through the child study team or through private means, coming in with a diagnosis or a documented area where a child is really struggling and there is evidence that they need a special education and related service plan. So those are the 3 different plans.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That was really, I think, concise and clear. So how might someone know that their child might need one of these, could benefit from one of these plans?
So usually my theme tends to be if a child can't function in any area of life, whether they can't get to school, whether they are struggling to learn, whether they're having significant anxiety and having difficulty going through the routines, getting in school, staying in school, any area of life really, they're not struggling to sleep well or eat well or socialize or learn, complete their homework. Anything that the parent is seeing that is interfering with the functioning, which then ultimately dribbles into school or really mainly is at school. A parent can see that, or a teacher can document it. So parents who are going into not child study team meetings, parent-teacher conferences, and they're hearing your child is behind in reading, or your child is not writing up to speed with their same age peers, or I'm watching your child, they're anxious. They're not paying attention, or they're falling out of their seat. They're not raising their hand and they're just blurting out answers, or they're really not getting along with their peers on the playground. They can't sit at the lunch table or they're sitting by themselves. So any area of functioning at any point of the school day, if it's noticed by the teachers or the parents or both, that's an area that obviously needs to be addressed, because now the child can't function in the school system or in the classroom throughout the day as they should be able to.
I appreciate you bringing that up about it's not only academic achievement on like a test or an assignment, but also that behavioral piece. And I know that we've talked about often behavior can be, a communicator in some way, even if it's nonverbal.
Right, so a lot of our children don't know that they're anxious, they don't know that they may have dyslexia, or they don't know that they really can't sustain their attention long enough to be able to get through a task and complete it. So a lot of times children act out. So when I hear, my child is acting out, my child is being behavioral, is this oppositional defiance? I'm a big fan of let's hold off to the side on that label for now, because behavior is a form of communication, right? And what I always say is children don't wake up in the morning on Tuesday and decide, I'm going to go and flip a table at school. That's not what they're deciding to do. If children can, they will. If they can learn, if they can behave, if they can pay attention, they would. And if they're not, then it's up to us as the adults around the child to understand what is being communicated here. Is it a sensory issue? Is it an auditory processing issue? Could it be an attentional issue? Is there, symptoms of anxiety or autism that are kicking in, that are interfering, right? So that's where we have to say, what's going on? Let's not get lost in what we're seeing, but what is potentially being communicated to us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, let's say, as you mentioned, teachers or maybe a counselor could initiate this process. Let's say that it's not, that initiation isn't happening yet, but a parent has a concern and wants to consider one of these plans for their child. What would be the process for them to do that?
I think it's very important to first connect with your teacher and find out, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Are you noted, like you shared with me during the parent-teacher conference, that this, and this are happening? Is that still happening? What do you think is going on? This is what I'm seeing at home. My child is having a hard time coming home and sitting down and doing homework. I'm really struggling to get them here. There's a lot that I'm doing behind the scenes to get them to school and get their homework done, and for them to study and get their materials together and get out the door. So your teacher, I think, is your first person to connect with. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? What are you seeing? And if that's the case, then it's then putting in a referral to the child study team. If you believe, alongside your teacher, that more is needed than just accommodations through a 504 plan, if you have a diagnosis. If not, again, going back to an INRS plan. And then if there's a belief that the child needs a special education program, then you would refer to the child study team. And it's a simple letter that the parent can write that just says, I'd like to make a referral to the child study team for my child, birth date, teacher, grade. That's it. Within 20 days after it's received, the parent should receive a date to meet for an initial meeting with the child study team. And then you bring in any emails, any work samples, your observations, and you have a discussion with the team.
Okay, great. So with an INRS plan, the parent could either, the school can initiate that, or the parent, let's say, if they don't really have much data or any diagnoses, can start there. But if a parent maybe does have paperwork from doctors or mental health professionals or psychologists, psychiatrists, they can then speak with the school about initiating a 504 plan, which from what you're telling me is more about accommodations, and then IEP is more about potentially like modifying curriculum.
Correct.
Okay.
So with an INRS and a 504 plan, it's usually initiated through the guidance counselor.
Okay.
The IEP is initiated through a child study team.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm learning as I go.
It's all good. It's very complicated, and I mean, it's what I did for several years, and then being in private practice, having this information, I can then guide parents in doing this by providing the testing myself, providing the diagnostics, making the recommendations, and then the parents are able to take it back to the school, and a lot of the work has been done for them.
Absolutely, and that's the reason why we're having you on too, because a lot of, like we talked about, it's complex system, and so This is going to be a helpful tool for parents and caregivers to like learn a little bit more about this and what how they can play a role in supporting their child as they collaborate with the school.
And there's a lot of information that there's so many nuances, right? There's a special education code, and it has every process is delineated, but it's dense and it's not very super reader friendly. However, there is another book called The PRISE, Prise, the Parental Rights in Special Education book. That's also available online. Both of them are available online. And it delineates a little bit more parent-friendly to parents what the process looks like, what the timelines are, because the next step after you have that meeting with the child study team, if they agree that they're going to move forward with testing, or if you're coming in with a private report like provided by someone like me, the diagnosis is there, all the qualifications are in there, and it makes it easier for them. Some child study teams may decide we're going to do our own testing, 1 or 2 evaluations, just because it's part of the process, and then we can move forward. Once you get to that eligibility piece, from the time that you meet with the child study team, if they decide they're going to move forward with an evaluation and the eligibility process, there is now a 90-day period that they have 90 days to gather all their information from teachers, from standardized test results, yada, 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 come back together in 90 days to determine eligibility for the child. And then that eligibility has to fall into one of the specific categories that are delineated in the special education code. And the primary ones are other health impaired for significant anxiety, central auditory processing disorders, ADHD, significant emotional disorders in general. There's autism, there's specific learning disabled, communication impaired, and the list goes on. But those are the primary ones that I see where eligibility is determined. Once that's set, now the next step is to determine a program. And this is what the IEP offers that a 504 and INRS do not. And that is looking to see if there is a discrepancy between the IQ test that's administered by the school psychologist and the educational evaluation that's administered by the learning specialist. And they're basically looking to see, is there a discrepancy between the full-scale IQ and any major area of learning? That's when you're looking for specific learning disability. So once that is determined, or if there is another diagnosis that is impacting the student's ability to learn, now we have to take a look and say, here are options for program, which one does the child need? Now, these programs are all available to child, regardless of what's available in the school per se, specific in that school. So that's an important piece that I like to emphasize to parents, is that if your child needs a program and the data supports it, the program has to be made available to your child. So from there, you have different options like pull-out resource for different classes, in-class resources, supplemental, but those are the primary things. And then the related services are occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. Those are the primary ones. And counseling. That's what I'm blanking on. Counseling is another one that can be provided by the school social worker or the school psychologist, and that can be implemented into the child's program. And the IEP is a very comprehensive document, and it just, delineates eligibility. It reviews all the test data that the child has completed, accommodations. And accommodations are a list of things that students may need in the classroom, such as nonverbal cues to remain focused, a word bank, multiple choice instead of fill in the blank. So things like that, and the list is exhaustive. It really can be anything depending on, again, what the child is demonstrating a need for, in addition to what the data is supporting. And then that's in there as well. Statewide testing accommodations are also in there. And then the IEP, once it's created, has to be reviewed annually. Every year, like 1 day prior to that, there's a deadline. Every 3 years, a child needs to be reevaluated. So if the child is tested today in 2025, 3 years from now, the child needs to be reevaluated again, because the hope is they've now made progress. So wherever their area of weakness was back then, if we put in the right remediation programs and supports, the child should make progress in that area. And then there might be other areas where the child is now demonstrating need or continued need for the IEP. The ultimate goal is for the child to have less and less support because they've been remediated, they've matured, they've gained the skill, and now they can learn more independently and with less supports. However, some students don't, and that's okay. So when a child then graduates high school, the IEP turns into a 504 plan at the college level. So then students who graduate from high school, if they've been tested most recently, they can take that test result and bring it over to the Office of Disability Services, and it's a different name in every school. And the student now, because they're 18, has to make the request for a 504 plan themselves, and then they have to show documentation, whether it's up to like testing or a diagnosis, and that demonstrates a need, and then they put accommodations in place. The process at the college level is much easier than the process at the, from elementary, middle, and high school. It doesn't have all these delineated timeframes and so forth. It's a much quicker process. You can request it in 2 weeks, you can have a 504 plan. But then it's then the responsibility of the student to go to the professor and say, I have a 504 plan, these are the accommodations I need. And a lot of kids don't want to do that, so there's a lot of guidance of send an email, let them know, followed up with an in-person, and then you have to ask for it because professors don't know. Different accommodations that are available at the college level are taking tests in a different room, alone. It's called a low distraction environment, where they can take the test either with one or two other people or several other people, but it's much smaller and quieter. They have extended time. Sometimes they need a peer note taker. They can have some college classrooms have microphones, and it records the professor's lecture, and then it's available on a website as an MP3 file that they can play again. So they can have access to that. They can have access to audiobooks, especially if a learning disability is their primary disability. And so they can have the book read to them, and they can watch it read and listen to it while they're reading the textbook. And so that's just multisensory, instruction for them and taking in of information. There's so many different things. Like my son has a 504 plan, and because his medication for ADHD wears off by a certain time, he needs to register for classes earlier than his peers so that he can get the earlier classes, and not to really sit in classes past 5 o'clock because that's when it's wearing off and his focus is now a little bit weaker. So accommodations like that can be made, which is wonderful. It really allows students beyond high school to still have the support that they need to succeed.
Thank you for sharing all of that. This is really valuable information, and I love that it's being recorded too, so people can reference back and really take in all of this information. I'm going back to a little bit before where you were mentioning some things like maybe speech therapy or counseling as part of an IEP. Are those things at cost to parents and caregivers?
No, it's all part of the IEP, and it's covered under that service. So parents don't have to pay extra. Anything that's paid for is paid for if you're doing it outside of school on your own time. And you can get occupational therapy for a sensory processing disorder or fine motor skills or handwriting, speech therapy. The way that a student becomes eligible for those services is that area of speech or the emotional functioning or the sensory is impacting the child's ability to access their education. And it has to interfere with their functioning within school. So that's kind of the little bit of the thing we have to keep in mind. It's not just this is impacting my child at large, it has to impact the child in school and their ability to navigate the building, open the doors, walk through the halls, hold a pencil, take notes, take a test. So it's specific to that. And counseling in school is school-based counseling. So we're not doing deep dives. So just so that parents know that sometimes that's all the support the child needs, especially if their source of angst is coming from school. But if it's not, then may need more support outside of school. And that's when you pay for it.
I really appreciate that clarification because I think there can be sometimes misunderstandings where, like you said, there might be an overall problem, but not necessarily relating to school, and that's where a school might have some limitations, and that can be like a piece of misinformation. So I really appreciate you clarifying that and really showing the differences there.
Sure.
What age are children eligible for services?
So anytime before 3 years of age, a parent who notices that a child is delayed in some area, they usually consult with their pediatrician, or the pediatrician says to the child, hey, I notice your child is behind in this area, developmentally, speech, physical with like walking, standing, rolling, all of that. During that time, from 0 up until age 3, if there is a developmental delay in any area, a parent can refer to early intervention. And there are services that are available to families at either low cost or no cost, and the services are provided in home. Right before they turn 3, then become the responsibility of the public school system. So early intervention helps to facilitate that if the child is registered with early intervention. If not, it is now the parent's responsibility to seek out the public school system and say, I have a child who's 3, I have a documented area of disability for my child. And then, again, they seek out the child study team. So they'll write a letter, they'll have a meeting within 20 days, and then they sit down and talk about the areas of developmental delay. They move forward with testing. Then there's specialized testing for children that young, and they're looking for a disability in one area at 33% or 2 areas of delay at 25% each. And then the child then becomes eligible under preschool with a child disability, PSCD. And the child is now eligible for services from 3 to 5 within the public school system. And they can receive an IEP with the program and all the related services as well. At 5 years of age, the child is reevaluated because now they need to be deemed eligible under those categories of eligibility that we were discussing earlier. And then another program is written up for the child as they enter into kindergarten. So that would be the progression from 0 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 and up. Children are eligible for special education and related services from age 3 through their 21st birthday. At 21, they now fall under, again, they're no longer under IDEA, they're under ADA, they're Americans with Disabilities Act. There are a lot less resources and funding available to students 21 plus, and this is an area where it's, in my practice I'm seeing this, where a lot of our students, they don't have a program, parents don't have a lot of direction. A lot of times that's when parents will, it's ideal if they can register children who have some significant delays with the Division of Developmental Disabilities, DDD, and then certain services are available then. But you no longer have a case manager like on the child study team. The parents really have to be the ones to push along a lot of this, and you will get a case manager through DDD, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done by the parent to really get together certain supports and treatments and involvement. Like the programs are not as plentiful, and it's just unfortunate that's where it is. And I'm hoping that will change over time.
Thank you for that. And we'll be able to link some of these resources at the end of our podcast.
Awesome.
So that people can reference that and really have that information. With that, so let's say we've talked about how to request some of these services. If a parent already identifies that their child might have a diagnosis, how can they get one? Because from what I understand, that schools don't diagnose. So they won't diagnose depression, anxiety, autism spectrum disorder. It would really be up to the parent to obtain that diagnosis.
That's correct. So a child study team member, a school psychologist, a learning specialist, or the social worker can't provide any diagnostics. So a psychologist like myself can provide diagnostics. So through the psychoeducational evaluations that I provide, I can give an ADHD, autism, anxiety, learning disability, dyslexia diagnosis. So that's one person. A psychiatrist can really diagnose a lot of the mood stuff. Neurologists can as well, developmental pediatricians. And pediatricians. Some pediatricians are comfortable diagnosing and managing medication for kids, and some just aren't. So those are your primary areas where you would go and seek a diagnosis because one cannot be provided for you. So sometimes child study team members will say to a parent, we see attentional weaknesses. We can't diagnose. You may want to consult with your pediatrician or seek a neurologist, psychiatrist, developmental pediatrician, your pediatrician, or a psychologist. And then any one of us can diagnose, put it in documentation, and then send it back to the school with recommendations for what the student is going to need.
And are there any situations where a school would pay for that?
There are. Sometimes, to me, I don't really know when that is. It kind of feels a little random, even when I did sit on the child study team. Sometimes it's covered, sometimes it's not. Sometimes for kids who are really flailing and the school doesn't know what to do, especially if a child is acting out immensely, they may send the child for a psychiatric evaluation in order to see is this the appropriate placement for the child, or what else can be done? Because again, without a diagnosis, there's certain things that just can't be done and certain programs and supports that can't be implemented. And the child study team's hands are kind of tied in that respect. So I was very happy when I was able to go into private practice and be the one to say, this is what it is, now let's move forward with a lot of clear delineation.
Thank you. That's important, I think, to clarify so that parents and caregivers can really understand what the expectations are from the parental role, but what can, and really, encouraging families to speak with the school staff and teachers and asking them questions, because schools can be a wealth of knowledge as well, and to be really answering questions specific to their child.
And to remember that before a child even goes through the process of having a 504 plan, an INRS, or an IEP, the guidance counselor, the principal, the school nurse, the general education teacher, those are your points of contact. And once you have an IEP, that's when your special education teacher comes in. And then the different resources and supports that are available there. But there are people in the school to reach out to and gain information. And there's also standardized testing that tends to be done. It's not standardized testing, I should call it baseline testing. That's done in like September and then February to look at math skills, reading and writing skills. So that is another touch point for parents in terms of where was my child reading in February of last year, June of last year, and then September of this year, February of this year, just to have these points. So they're just for parents to know that there are baseline measurements being done, and you have a right to request them.
One of the things that I'm really curious about, as we know, this is about public school support. Are there any situations where maybe a student is doing well academically, but could maybe benefit from a 504 plan?
Absolutely. So students who may be on the autistic spectrum, have significant anxiety or ADHD, but are high achievers as well, they may be performing well academically. So their report card looks fantastic, but what nobody may know at school is behind the scenes when they're at home, there is a parent who is acting like that child's executive functioning brain. So they're taking out the assignments. They're looking through the Google Classroom. They're delineating schedules and alarms and this and that of what the child needs to do and when. They're packing up their backpack. They're writing out the flashcards for their kid to study. And they're doing so much work that, again, the final product is a great grade, but nobody knows how much work is being done at home to help that child achieve that way. And that's where sometimes a lot of my parent coaching work comes in, where I have to say to a parent, you need to step back a little bit because we want the child to pick up those skills and to teach them those skills. And we also provide executive functioning coaching, and that is a service that's available, by multiple providers, but helping the child to learn how to manage time, prioritize assignments, organize materials, open up a planner, whether it's a Google Classroom or learning how to use Alexa for timers. It's like my favorite thing in the world. I wouldn't have even been here if Alexa didn't say go. But nonetheless, using those kind of supports to help children to get things done independently. But if students aren't showing that struggle, teachers don't know. So a lot of times I'll say to parents and to the student, you need to go in and ask for extended time on your assignments. You need to ask for extended time on your tests. They're just internalizing a lot of that, and they're going home and working for hours and hours and hours. They're waking up so early before school to work on that homework assignment, or they're staying up really late to get that homework assignment done because they're just so distracted and their sustained attention isn't really great. And by the time they get to the diagnosis, there's so many not so great habits that have kind of become really embedded, and parents are working really hard. It's especially helpful for parents. My recommendation is to let your child struggle now while they're with you at home, as opposed to waiting when they go to college, because then nobody knows. And then you're just at the end of a semester looking at a report card and going, what happened? And this was also the case for me with my son, is like one day he's 17 and I have access to everything, and one day he's 18 and now I have access to nothing. Nothing changed between yesterday and today, but now I can't do much. But it's very frustrating as a parent, whereas before I can jump onto Genesis or whatever it was and take a look and see what's happening and where are your missed assignments, to I have access to nothing. So it's really, I think, important for parents to know that these are skills that really need to be formed before our kids go to college, and to do that during high school, especially with a very high emphasis on their junior and senior years, for students to start to take real responsibility for doing things like laundry, because when they go to college, they got to do their own laundry. They got to change their own sheets, learn how to change the sheets, learning how to make your doctor's appointments, learning when to make appointments to go see your professors and to find out when their office hours are, keeping track of all of that information, because once they're outside of our houses, we don't know much, right? So let's not wait till then. And nothing magical, I assure you, nothing magical happens when they turn 18 and they, pack their bags and go to college. Really, if they don't have the skill, they're not going to all of a sudden magically gain it over there. So I think it's really important for parents to give their kids those experiences and build more accountability and responsibility, and let them struggle while they're home and under your roof, because then you can coach and mentor. And that's, I think, where our role as parents then shifts from being on top of everything to then ultimately saying, all right, do you know what you need to do today? Did you check asking more questions as opposed to guiding. So that those questions then become internalized in their own minds, so they can begin to ask themselves and to build that autonomy, which is what we want for our kids.
Yeah, that's a beautiful depiction of really painting a picture for, validating a parent wanting to help their child be academically successful and just successful in life, but how sometimes that can hinder, and really not allow schools to recognize that their student might be struggling, and there's going to come a point that they're not going to have this assistance from their parents or caregivers, and that it's pretty exhausting. So if there are some accommodations that can happen in school that will assist this student, this will also take some, stress off the parent's plate.
Yeah, and just thinking about all the students that come through my doors, is that there's a lot of anxiety, and they're intelligent and they can get through their tests, but they're anxious about getting the test done. So the anxiety occupies a lot of the time, and they can't get the test done, not because they don't know the content, not because they're not prepared, but because they're worried about getting the test done, right? And it's such an internal experience, and there's so much that nobody's seeing. So really teaching and encouraging our kids verbalize what's happening. Parents can be good at looking at a child and going, this is where you're struggling, right? But no one else is ever going to know that. And we don't want our kids going out into the world thinking someone's going to read your mind. You got to use your words and share what's going on so that the others around you can then begin to support you.
Absolutely. Encouraging their own self-advocacy as well, on top of what the parent is doing to support.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for this information, Dr. Liz Nissim.
Thank
This
you.
has been a really enjoyable conversation with so much information that I think can really assist our parents and caregivers in supporting their students and encouraging collaboration with the school.
Awesome. Thank you.